Only a few months after Michael Jackson died, the FBI opened part of its archive and placed 333 pages into public view. At first glance, it looked like a major act of disclosure. But much of the material was buried beneath black ink. Names disappeared. Passages were erased. Entire sections remained beyond public reach. And that raises the question the released files never answer. What was left out? In the years that followed, former agents and people familiar with the investigations began offering accounts that did not always match the clean, limited story presented in those documents. Their claims suggested that the public had seen only a carefully selected fragment of a much larger record, one involving surveillance beyond American borders, operations hidden from public scrutiny, and information the government still refuses to disclose. Even more than a decade after Jackson's death, parts of that history remain sealed. To understand why, we have to move beyond the explanation most people were given. The FBI's interest in Michael Jackson did not simply begin with the allegations that later consumed his public image. According to the timeline hidden within the available records, federal attention may have reached back much further, to a moment when Jackson was not under criminal suspicion, but was already becoming one of the most powerful cultural figures on Earth. The trail leads to February 27, 1984, inside Los Angeles' Shrine Auditorium. Jackson was filming a Pepsi commercial when a pyrotechnic effect ignited too early. Flames caught his hair. Within seconds, the performance turned into chaos. Jackson suffered severe burns to his scalp and was rushed for emergency treatment. The images became part of pop culture history. But another part of the story remained almost invisible. Days after the accident, a confidential federal memo reportedly recorded witness accounts that someone may have interfered with the pyrotechnic equipment before filming began. Investigators spoke with people who claimed they had noticed suspicious activity around the setup. Then the trail abruptly ended. There was no publicly documented breakthrough, no clear explanation for why the lead was abandoned. The inquiry appears to have been closed before the possibility of deliberate sabotage was fully resolved. Years later, a retired agent who said he had worked in the Los Angeles field office during that period spoke anonymously to a journalist. His description of the Bureau's role was disturbing. According to him, the priority was not to keep Jackson safe. It was to keep him under observation. That distinction changes everything. If federal investigators had been warned that something unusual happened before the Pepsi accident, why did the focus appear to shift away from whoever may have endangered him and toward Michael himself? The answer may have less to do with the man the public saw on stage and more to do with the influence he was quietly accumulating behind the scenes. To millions of fans, Michael Jackson was the artist who had shattered records with Thriller. To powerful institutions, he was becoming something far more difficult to define. By 1985, Michael Jackson was no longer simply a performer. He was becoming a force. And the moment his influence extended beyond music, the attention surrounding him appeared to change. Michael Jackson was no longer simply earning money from hit records. He was learning how ownership worked, who controlled the songs, who collected the royalties, and who continued profiting long after the performer had left the stage. Then, on August 14, 1985, he made a decision that stunned the entertainment world. For approximately $47.5 million, Jackson acquired ATV Music Publishing, gaining control of thousands of compositions, including 251 songs written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney. It was one of the boldest business deals ever made by a recording artist. But according to the narrative surrounding later records obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, federal interest in Jackson's finances intensified almost immediately afterward. And that creates an uncomfortable question. Why would the purchase of a private music catalog matter to federal investigators? The surviving language in the alleged records reportedly refers to concerns about foreign influence over culturally significant American assets. But behind that formal wording was a far more sensitive reality. a young black entertainer had just gained control over an extraordinary piece of Western musical history. Suddenly, officials allegedly wanted to know who had guided the purchase, where the money had come from, which financial institutions were involved, and what Jackson planned to do with the catalog. One heavily censored document has been described as carrying an extraordinary subject line, one that reportedly connected Michael Joseph Jackson with possible threats to cultural security, not national security, not organized crime, cultural security. If authentic, the phrase reveals how differently powerful institutions may have viewed him. To the public, he was a performer making an intelligent investment. To those watching from inside government offices, he may have represented something harder to control, cultural power combined with financial independence. And soon, Jackson began speaking more openly about the industry that had made him famous. He criticized the treatment of black musicians. He argued that generations of artists had created enormous wealth while receiving only a fraction of its value. He described major record companies in language that was direct, confrontational, and impossible to ignore. For audiences, those statements sounded like frustration. For the establishment, they may have sounded like a warning. Some accounts of the redacted files claim that officials monitored what they characterized as increasingly provocative statements about the entertainment business. The concern, according to visible fragments described by researchers, was not simply what Jackson believed, but how many people might listen to him. He had access to millions of young fans. He could speak across racial and national boundaries. And unlike most public critics, he possessed the resources to act independently. They were not necessarily watching him because they believed he had committed a crime. They may have been watching because he had become influential enough to challenge the structure around him. Then his reach expanded beyond the United States. Jackson traveled constantly, moving through Europe, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. Wherever he arrived, airports filled, streets closed, and enormous crowds gathered. Every journey increased his global power. And according to claims surrounding unreleased intelligence records, every journey also generated new documentation. Reports have suggested that international files connected to Jackson may total more than 1,000 pages. Only a small portion has allegedly entered public view, and much of what remains visible is obscured beneath redactions. Names vanish. Locations disappear. The purpose of meetings is hidden. What survives is often just enough to reveal that something was being recorded, but not enough to explain why. Jackson's international presence placed him in rooms few entertainers could enter. Senior officials welcomed him. Governments treated his visits as major national events. His concerts attracted crowds larger than many political demonstrations. This was more than celebrity. It was soft power. A former intelligence analyst later described the problem in simple terms. In certain parts of the world, Michael Jackson could attract more attention than an official delegation from Washington. Heads of state wanted photographs with him. Entire populations recognized his face. His arrival could reshape the public mood of a country overnight. And influence of that size rarely goes unnoticed. When it operates outside official channels, it is studied. When it cannot be directed, it is monitored. Accounts of the FBI material repeatedly reference Jackson's contact with foreign officials. Yet many of the identifying details remain concealed. Decades later, the names of individuals and the locations of meetings are still reportedly blacked out. That secrecy raises another question. If these encounters were harmless ceremonial visits, why would the details remain sensitive after so much time? The unredacted fragments, according to researchers who examined the available material, suggest that authorities followed Jackson's international movements through cooperation with foreign agencies. They collected information about associates in countries including Britain, Germany, and Japan. Even some of his overseas charitable activity was allegedly flagged for further attention. One reported document indicates that investigators sought information connected to foreign financial accounts. Piece by piece, they appeared to be constructing a map of his world. His money, his relationships, his travel, his political access, his influence. But the files do not clearly explain the final objective. Were officials searching for evidence of a specific offense? Were they assessing whether foreign governments were attempting to use his celebrity? Or were they simply trying to understand a man whose global reach had grown beyond the control of the institutions around him? Whatever the answer was, the nature of the scrutiny would soon change dramatically. Because when the first major allegations against Michael Jackson emerged, federal involvement was no longer hidden in the background. It became part of the public investigation. Officially, the FBI's role was limited. Federal agents were said to be providing technical and investigative support to local authorities, but researchers examining the released documents have pointed to a troubling inconsistency. Some internal memos appear to discuss accusations involving Jackson before those accusations were widely known to the public. That does not automatically prove misconduct. Investigators often receive confidential information before a story reaches the press. But it leaves one critical question unresolved. How early did federal authorities know what was coming? And where had that information originated? A legal researcher examining the released records in 2018 noticed language that most viewers had overlooked. The documents referred to earlier intelligence, cross-referenced existing material, and described surveillance as already ongoing. Those phrases matter. They do not sound like the beginning of a new inquiry. They sound like investigators were placing fresh allegations inside a file that had been growing for years. By the time Michael Jackson faced his first major public accusation, federal authorities may already have possessed an extensive portrait of his life, his finances, business partners, foreign travel, private associations, and international reach. Then, more than a decade later, investigators gained access to the heart of that world. During the case that led to Jackson's 2005 trial, authorities searched Neverland Ranch and examined computers, storage devices, documents, and other seized material. Federal forensic specialists assisted with the digital analysis. The most important finding was also the least dramatic. The lead forensic examiner testified that the search uncovered no illegal images and no digital evidence supporting wrongdoing in the areas being examined. But the examiner's complete report never became part of the public record. When Jackson's attorneys sought access to the full analysis, prosecutors reportedly argued that portions of it were unrelated to the criminal charges. That explanation left the defense with a troubling possibility. Investigators may not have found what they entered Neverland searching for, but they may have discovered something else. Years later, a lawyer connected to Jackson's defense suggested that the seized devices could have contained sensitive financial information, international correspondence, and details of business transactions extending far beyond the scope of the case. Material about catalog ownership, foreign partnerships, private negotiations, communications with powerful people around the world. None of that would have proven the allegations being tried in court, but it could have revealed the internal structure of one of the most valuable entertainment empires on Earth. According to that theory, the information was separated from the criminal proceedings, withheld from evidence and absorbed into intelligence records that have never been fully disclosed. Then came the verdict. In June 2005, Michael Jackson was acquitted on every charge. Soon afterward, he left the United States and spent much of the following period living overseas. Publicly, the investigation was finished. Yet fragments from later records suggest that official interest did not disappear with the acquittal. Documents dated in 2006 and 2007 reportedly contain references to continued review, international financial activity, and ongoing monitoring connected to Jackson. He had been cleared in court. He was living outside the country. And still, someone appeared to be keeping track of him. To understand why, look at what Michael represented by the middle of the decade. He controlled or held interests in music assets valued at enormous sums. His commercial relationships stretched across numerous countries. His catalog holdings gave him leverage inside an industry that had once treated performers as replaceable products. At the same time, he was becoming increasingly outspoken about ownership, artist exploitation, and the power exercised by major record companies. He was not merely criticizing the system. He possessed the assets, audience, and global platform to challenge it. A partially visible memo reportedly written in 2008 referred to concerns surrounding Jackson's proposed business restructuring and the possibility of disruption within the entertainment industry. If that description is accurate, the focus was no longer conventional criminal activity. It was economic influence. A man with valuable intellectual property, international relationships, and unmatched public recognition was preparing to return to the stage. His comeback had the potential to generate hundreds of millions of dollars and restore much of the power he had lost during years of controversy. Then, before that return could happen, everything stopped. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died inside his Los Angeles home. Federal agents were reportedly sent to the scene within hours. For the death of one of the most famous people in the world, federal assistance would not necessarily have been unusual. But an officer who later described the scene claimed that FBI personnel arrived before some local investigators and began examining areas of Jackson's home, including his office and records. What they were searching for has never been clearly explained. In the aftermath, questions emerged about materials that could no longer be found. Business papers, computer drives, personal files. Attorneys representing Jackson's estate reportedly acknowledged that certain records believed to have existed were missing. Perhaps they were misplaced during the confusion. Perhaps they were removed by someone with legitimate access. Perhaps they were destroyed. Or perhaps they were taken for reasons that have never been made public. There is no conclusive public evidence establishing what happened to them. But the uncertainty becomes harder to dismiss when placed beside the government's own disclosure record. The FBI released 333 pages relating to Michael Jackson. Yet correspondence connected to Freedom of Information Act requests has been interpreted as indicating that additional material exists beyond what the public received. That leaves hundreds of pages still beyond view. Repeated attempts to obtain more records have reportedly encountered denials or exemptions involving national security, continuing investigative interests, and possible damage to foreign relations. Those explanations are extraordinary because Michael Jackson has been dead since 2009. More than 15 years have passed. So what investigation could still require protection? Which international relationship could be endangered by documents concerning a deceased entertainer? And why would records supposedly centered on ordinary criminal assistance contain information sensitive enough to affect national security or foreign governments? Unless the hidden files were never primarily about the accusations. Unless they documented something much larger, the financial reach of a global icon, his contact with political figures, his control of culturally valuable assets, and the influence he exercised without permission from any government. The released pages may tell the story officials were willing to acknowledge. The missing pages may tell the story they were determined to keep. Here is the rewritten continuation in a more cinematic, investigative voice, while keeping the allegations framed as claims rather than proven facts. Unless the real concern was never criminal behavior at all, unless it was the rise of a black artist who had accumulated too much wealth, too much cultural influence, and too much freedom to speak without permission. That is the argument several civil rights lawyers and researchers have raised when examining the government's long interest in Michael Jackson. They believe the pattern resembles an older form of intelligence gathering. Surveillance directed not at proven criminal activity, but at prominent African American figures whose voices carried political, cultural, or social weight. The comparison is controversial, but the references scattered throughout the released pages make it difficult to dismiss completely. Those references point toward records the public has never been allowed to examine in full, detailed financial monitoring, extensive travel histories, lists of foreign contacts, maps of business relationships, and reported assessments of Jackson's ability to influence public attitudes. There are even claims that communications were intercepted, that someone was not merely reading about Michael Jackson. Someone may have been listening. If those descriptions are accurate, then this was larger than support for a criminal investigation. It was the construction of an intelligence profile, a complete picture of an American citizen's money, movements, associates, conversations, and potential influence. And the most unsettling aspect is the language reportedly used to justify it. Not evidence of a specific crime, not an immediate public threat, but concern over his capacity to inspire unrest, challenge established industries, and shape the thinking of millions. In other words, the danger may not have been what Michael had done. It may have been what he could persuade others to see. By the final years of his life, Jackson had become increasingly vocal about exploitation inside the entertainment business. He spoke about ownership, racial inequality, and the way powerful corporations profited from artists while controlling their careers, identities, and legacies. For decades, performers had been encouraged to sing, smile, and leave the business decisions to someone else. Michael refused. He bought the assets. He studied the contracts. He learned where the real power lived. And then he began talking about it publicly. That combination, wealth, knowledge, independence, and a global audience, made him unlike almost any entertainer before him. Years after his death, the secrecy surrounding the records continued. In 2019, a legal effort reportedly sought the release of additional FBI material connected to Jackson. The request did not succeed. The court accepted arguments that disclosure could expose law enforcement procedures and reveal sensitive intelligence gathering techniques. But that explanation creates an even larger mystery. Michael Jackson has been dead since June 2009. There is no trial waiting to begin. There is no future prosecution involving him. So why would records about a deceased musician still threaten investigative methods? What techniques were used? What information was collected? And what would the public learn if the blacked-out sections were finally restored? The documents already available are filled with inquiries that produced little or nothing. Leads were examined. Evidence was tested. Investigations ended without establishing the accusations many expected them to prove. Yet the unreleased material remains protected. Hundreds of pages still sit outside public view. And perhaps that is where the true story begins. Not a story about a conventional investigation, but one about the relationship between celebrity and state power. About what happens when an entertainer becomes an economic force, a cultural symbol, and an independent political voice all at once. Michael Jackson repeatedly said that he felt surrounded. He spoke of people following him, powerful interests working against him, and institutions attempting to control his career and reputation. To many observers, those statements sounded like fear. To others, they sounded like paranoia. But paranoia means believing you are being watched when no one is watching. In Michael Jackson's case, government records confirm that federal authorities did collect information about him over many years. That does not prove every suspicion he ever expressed. It does not prove that every setback was coordinated, or that every person around him was part of a larger operation. But it changes the question. The mystery is no longer whether official agencies ever watched Michael Jackson. The existing files show that they did. The mystery is why the surveillance continued, how far it extended, and what remains hidden inside the pages the public is still forbidden to read. Because if the unreleased records contain only routine investigative work, their secrecy becomes difficult to explain. But if they contain details of financial monitoring, international intelligence cooperation, communications collection, and assessments of Jackson's cultural power, then the story is far more significant than anything written in the headlines. It becomes the story of a man who rose from child performer to global institution. A man who stopped being merely profitable and started becoming powerful. A man who learned how the system worked and then began telling the world what he had discovered. Perhaps the sealed records contain nothing extraordinary. Perhaps decades of secrecy have created a mystery larger than the evidence itself. But until every page is released, the central question will remain unanswered. What did the government learn about Michael Jackson that it still believes the public should not know? For more stories hidden behind the mythology of the King of Pop, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the public story may already be famous, but the hidden one is only beginning to surface.